Hi friends, I hope you are well. I've missed you in my classroom and creating together. I am excited though in the meantime to post a new video for you each week to follow along and create with me, and then hopefully we'll be together again soon and creating in my art room very soon. So today's lesson is focusing on Henri Matisse, who's my very favorite artist, so I'm happy to share him with you. I included a link to a cohesive lesson that I'm hoping you already checked out, but this video is more of just a supplement to that lesson so that you can see my face and hear my voice and get a demonstration in the same way that you're used to in my classroom. So we're going to focus on a few vocabulary terms today. If you're a younger student, it might be new words, and if you're a student who's had me for a few years, like third or fourth or fifth graders, then these should be terms that you know, so this would be a review. So we're going to create a collage today. A collage is when you take some flat pieces of artwork or paper and glue them together to make a piece of artwork. So things have been attached and put together, but it's still a two-dimensional surface. So today you're going to need a white piece of paper, or even a piece of poster board or cardboard would be fine, and then some different colors of construction paper. And a variety of colors is nice, but if you're limited, that's fine. If you can only find scrapbooking paper, that's fine. And if you have to paint some cardboard pieces to make it, that's fine too. I realize that we're all kind of limited on supplies at home. You'll also need a pair of scissors and a glue stick. You won't need a pencil for this project unless you feel like you need it just to help with your confidence a little bit. Matisse is known for drawing with scissors, which means that he did not draw his shapes before he cut them out, which is kind of part of the fun of the project. So you don't need a pencil. So I want to talk to you about a few different elements that we're going to be including in our artwork before we begin so that we can make some thoughtful decision making while we're creating our artwork. So the first thing I want to mention is geometric shapes. Geometric shapes are math shapes, shapes that you can name, shapes like rectangles and triangles and circles and shapes that you can name. The other kind of shape that we're going to use today is organic shapes. And organic shapes are natural shapes, shapes that you find in nature, wiggly jiggly shapes, the shapes that are hard to give a name to. This one is very distinctly Matisse, like the artwork behind me, which is Matisse. So we're going to be using both in our artwork today. I also wanted to talk to you about the difference between positive and negative space. When you go to cut something out of a piece of paper, the positive space usually pertains to the item that you were trying to cut out and what you intended to keep. And then the negative space is usually what's the scrap, which is a void where there normally would be paper or material or whatever. So positive space, negative space. And it's nice if you're able to use both in your artwork. You'll notice if you look through Matisse examples on that link I gave you that he often uses the negative space as well. Other things to consider during your creating process today. The first thing would be to consider, do you want to make a symmetrical or an asymmetrical artwork? Asymmetrical artwork would mean that what's happening on the left side of your paper is not the same as what's happening on the right side of your paper. Symmetry, of course, or creating a symmetrical piece of artwork would mean that what is happening on the left side of your paper is being mirrored or the same on the right side of your paper. So you need to consider, do you want to do asymmetrical artwork or do you want to create something that is symmetrical? So again, there's no wrong answer, but when we're creating art, especially for the purposes of art class, it's nice if you are intentional with each step of the process, making intentional thoughtful decisions. Something else to consider would be what you want your composition to look like. If you're a younger student, maybe a simpler composition with fewer shapes that are larger would be a better option as you work through improving your skills of cutting and gluing. And then older students, as you progress up through the grades, it might be a little bit more appropriate for you to cut out some smaller, more challenging challenging shapes that are complicated, and more layering might be appropriate for you. So consider, what you're capable of doing based on your grade level or your age level. So what you want to do is start cutting out some shapes, and then you can start laying them on your paper however you think looks nice. I am intentionally placing these shapes up here because they are the same, and that creates repetition in my artwork. Could also be creating pattern in my artwork, which is a nice element to include. Sometimes it's nice if you use both the positive and negative space in your artwork when you're creating work. It's also sometimes fun if you can put your piece back together like a puzzle and then flip it and display it in that way. Or I could display them next to each other, or I could put them in totally different places on my artwork. All of those would be okay. Maybe I would even rotate this one and attach it to the side of this one. I'm going to continue laying some shapes out in the way that I like. I might consider overlapping several shapes. That will create depth in my artwork and interest. And when I go to cut out more shapes, I wanted to give you some useful pointers. If I'm going to cut out a shape out of a large piece of paper, I think it's sometimes helpful to cut out a smaller piece. It's more manageable before I start cutting out what shape I had in mind. I was thinking I was going to make another one of these famous Matisse seaweed type shapes. And I wanted to point out to you that if you'll notice, I'm not really moving my scissor hand or my cutting hand very much here. I'm just using that hand to open and close the scissors. I'm instead using my left hand, which is my non-cutting hand, to move the paper and turn it, and so that it can move through the scissors. Oftentimes, students instead try to move the scissors, and then you end up doing this kind of thing. That's where I get students sticking their tongues out, and that can be difficult. So, little pro tip here, if you instead use your non-cutting hand to twist and manipulate the paper through the scissor blade, that sometimes is easier. So I've got another shape that matches the ones behind me here. Those are my favorite. And then I've got the negative space. Maybe what I'll do here is cut this so it's more even, and then I can use both of these. So now that I'm starting to place some of these and I like the way they look, I might consider to pause and use my glue stick, to start gluing some of these shapes down. The reason I like a glue stick for this project is because some of us are still working on mastering our gluing skills, and if we use too much glue and get big blobs here, then when I go to stick my artwork down on the paper, as you all well know, it might squish out the sides, creating a really messy situation, but also when it finally dries, your paper will be heavy and warped from the overuse of glue. So I think that a glue stick is a really good material to use for this. So I'm going to continue gluing, I'm going to continue cutting and layering. And again, if you're a younger student, maybe you're cutting out less shapes, but they're larger and more simplified. And if you are a student who's a little more advanced in your skill level, then you can work on cutting out more challenging, intricate shapes and more of them, and consider more layering to create a busy, interesting piece of artwork. The artwork behind me is one of my favorites. It's zoomed in as my background, but it is essentially the same shape repeated over and over in a fan type format. So consider what you want your finished piece to look like. In this case, he really just focused on one shape in many colors and fanning them all out in different directions. But in this case, I'm hoping that you'll choose to do several different shapes so that you can show me an understanding of the buzzwords that we talked about, which of course are geometric shapes and organic shapes. If you use both, then I can see that you have an understanding of that. We talked about positive and negative space. If you use both, then I can see that you have an understanding of that. And to be thoughtful and careful in your decision making when you're choosing how to arrange your composition, which means how you're going to place items to make a finished visual effect. Did you choose asymmetry versus symmetry? Was it a thoughtful decision? And ultimately, I hope that you have fun creating and that you've made something that you feel really proud of. So if you'd like to share with me what you've created pertaining to this project or anything else that you're being creative with at home, please feel free to include it on our classroom page for art so that I can see it. I would love that. And then otherwise, I guess I will see you next Monday with a new lesson. So thanks for tuning in and hanging out with me. I miss you all dearly, and we'll be together again soon. Stay well.